Welcome back, wonderful viewers. Nice to see you again. This is a fairly brief video today, just looking at one of the exhibits that dropped over the last few days. One of the long-awaited exhibits that we finally had released, which is to do with Richard Allen's lead sheet, the tip, the interview by Dulin. This is something we haven't seen in all these months. We're nearly at a year post-trial, but it's finally been released, and it really helps us to, I guess, understand what's going on here. Actually, it doesn't help us to understand what's going on here at all. It adds even more incredulousness to this whole discussion because law enforcement's narrative here is that Rick did present to police in 2017, shortly after the murders, and indicated that he had been on the trails that day around 1 to 3 p.m. And he was subsequently interviewed by Officer Dan Dulin, who then obtained more of a narrative from him around his movements on that day on the trails. Now, law enforcement and the prosecution's narrative is that information was obtained but then erroneously cleared and erroneously misfiled and did not see the light of day again until Kathy Shank came across it in, I believe, a box or a drawer in around September 2022. Now, already that sounds like a very hard to believe story. It sounds absolutely absurd. We have a double homicide of two young girls in a small town and this major crime, and yet one of the people who indicated they were on the trails that day, who came forward, one of the only men in that specific time frame, came forward and his tip was marked erroneously as cleared and then misfiled. So already that had led most of us to be incredulous, as I said before. But when we actually look at this documentation in more detail, it just adds even more layers of suspicion, if you ask me. So we're going to look at the couple of pages that have come out and just point out a couple of things on these pages that are concerning, that have made me certainly, and I've seen other people on X as well commenting on this, really have a head scratch, essentially. So if we look at the very first sheet, we've got here, this is when the information comes in. And we've got here that person named, I believe, Alexis Lucas on the 16th of the 2nd, 2017 at 9:45 p.m. has written that Rick Allen Whiteman was at the trails Monday between maybe 1 and 3, and he advised he did see 3 young females. So this is when Rick has initially presented to law enforcement indicating that he had been on the trails that day. I believe this is around the time when law enforcement were asking people to come forward. So he did that. He did his due diligence like you would expect somebody to do who is trying to help an investigation, and he provided his details, his phone number, his name. Yes, it is incorrectly written as Rick Allen Whiteman, but nonetheless, they have Rick Allen, they have his number, and they have a very brief narrative, and the follow-up is that he needs to be contacted and they need to discuss with him what he observed, whether he saw any possible suspects and who the girls were that he saw. So you can see on this sheet, first of all, last activity right up the top says the 2nd of the 19th, 2017. So that's the 19th of February, 2017 at 6:40 p.m. So that was the last activity on this. So this is literally only a few days later that it was last accessed. Now, if we go down a little bit, we've got here leads triggered by this, contact Rick about seeing girls, see if he observed others such as possible suspects. And then we've got here from Delphi to CCSO Investigations. Ashley Boone, so another name comes up as the investigator, and it says lead status fully covered. We then have lead coverage underneath it, which I believe is the narrative from Dulin. And again, we have some more names here. We've got, I can't read this very well, it's a bit glitchy, Teresa Gator, and then it says on behalf of Dan Dulin. Now, if you notice how many names we have on this sheet now, we have submitted by Alexis Lucas, name number 1. We've got investigator Ashley Boone, name number 2. We've got covered by Teresa Gator, name number 3. And we've got on behalf of Dan Dulin, name number 4. Now, that's 4 people who this information has passed through. And I'm assuming that these are all people, obviously, who are related to the Delphi Police Department or the ISP. So straight away, that's a concern to me. Why are we now seeing 4 different names and none of them have seen this as relevant or important enough to bring up again in subsequent days, let alone subsequent months and years? So it's not the issue that there's 4 people involved. I mean, that may be police process. The issue is that 4 people have seen this already back in the early days of the investigation, where it would have been very much high on the list of information related to the crime, and yet none of them have felt the need to bring this up again. I've just realized I've got the wrong sheet on the screen as I'm talking. So this was actually the other page that I was just referring to, which is here. Now, if we go back to the page that I had up before, which is here, I'm just going to open that on my screen a little bit bigger too. This is where we see that cleared status. So let's go again to the top here. So we've got Orion work package, and it says Dan Dulin, unclassified. And it says created by Alexis Lucas. So this was created on the 16th of the 2nd. So this was, from the looks of it, if we look at the other page, a couple of hours after she took the details from Rick. She's then created this, and it has been received by none other than Jerry Holman on the 16th of the 2nd, 2017 at 4:30 p.m. That's a bit unusual too, isn't it? I don't really understand how that's an earlier time. Regardless, what we're seeing here is that this lead in progress, as it says at the top of the screen, was created by, again, Alexis Lucas, who was on the other page. So that's one of the 4 people we've already named. But it was received by Jerry Holman on that day. Jerry Holman is one of the lead investigators. He still has continued to be until the conviction of Rick Allen. So he received this. We now have a 5th person within law enforcement who has received this information. And here we have a person who is highly integral in this investigation. So we've mentioned before that Dan Dulin is on the stage at the press conference just a few days later when they are appealing for Bridge Guy with the picture up on the screen. And Jerry Holman clearly is there too. We have 2 people who are aware that there was a man who said he was on the trails between 1 and 3, or 1:30 and 3:30 if we consider the longer narrative. That is well within the crime scene time frame, and yet nobody seems to have cared about it. We've got 5 law enforcement officers, 2 of which are on the stage at the press conference. The fact is that Rick is the only man that says he's on the trail earlier in the day. We know that there's a whole bunch of people that come a little bit later, and there are a couple of men involved in that group. So, well, not involved, but as part of that group, like Daniel Pearson, Dave Riley, the dog walker, and we have McCain as well, or FSG, flannel shirt guy. So they all come or appear to arrive at the trails after the abduction, because they pull into the car lot after Betsy Blair has left. So they were not on the trails during that really key window. Rick is the only person who is saying he is on the trails in that key window. And this is exactly why people who believe he's guilty say he's guilty, or at least one of the reasons. So if it's that obvious, then why was it not seen as that obvious back in 2017 by the lead investigator, or one of the lead investigators? I obviously don't believe that Rick is the only man on the trails at that time. I believe that Bridge Guy is not Rick Allen, and I believe that there potentially are other offenders entering from the other side of the bridge, nothing to do with the trail area, which is why they're not seen on the trails. But again, we can see here that this narrative would not just be easily cleared and popped away and misfiled. It would be on their mind, even if they didn't have the piece of paper in front of them. You're not going to forget. There were not that many people on the trails that day in that time frame. So if we think of between 1:30 and 3:30, we've only got Betsy Blair, the 4 girls, Abby and Libby, Bridge Guy, and Rick Allen. And then we've got the gang after that. So we've got Shelby Hicks, Shelby Duncan, Cheyenne Mill, Daniel Pearson, Dave Riley, and Dave McCain or Dan McCain. I always get them confused. But we've got FSG. So that's like, I think 10, I just counted maybe 11 people. So you didn't remember one of those people? Like, that doesn't sound realistic or reasonable to me. So already we've got this issue that we've got 5 law enforcement officers who have heard about this person and heard at least part of the narrative that tells them there was a man on the trails in that time frame. But we've also got Jerry Holman particularly looking at this. We then go down a little bit further on this piece of paper and you see the lead cleared aspect there. And we've got here, nothing new, phone info provided to ISP, lead cleared. Right. So this is a big red flag here. It's not simply that this piece of paper is misfiled or lost, which again makes it, I find that hard to believe. This is in their online system, right? And I don't know enough about law enforcement systems, but this is typed up and it's in a system that's active. And somebody has gone in and not only written on a printed out sheet, lead cleared, nothing new, phone info provided to ISP, but it's also, I believe, been marked up here. Is it on this one or the second one? This one says leads in progress, but the second one, so I'll bring that back up onto the screen. Just wanted to bring it up onto my screen at the same time. It says, I believe, somewhere on here, lead status, fully cleared. So you'll see around here, lead status, fully cleared. So, or fully covered, sorry, not cleared, fully covered. So we now have not just a page that says lead cleared, no further follow-up, but we also have in this system, it's saying lead status fully covered, and we have last activity 19th of the 2nd at 6:40 p.m. Okay, so we can see here that somebody has gone in and cleared this tip. We don't know who because we've never been told. Now, to me, that's a pretty big issue. Now, this lead sheet here, and I keep going between the two of them, I feel like there's so much overlap with them, and I don't know which one's first and which one's second. But if we go back to this one, I believe this would be the first one. You can see here as well on here that it says at the bottom, the 18th of the 2nd, 2017, 11:33 a.m. So this is when this information is being put into that system. And then what's the timing on the second one? We've got the timing on the second one is obviously when it's being re-accessed and printed out, which is the 29th of the 10th, 2019. Wait a second. I just realized that. I hadn't seen that before. See down the bottom of the page, right in the right-hand corner, it says the 29th of October, 2019, 3:36 p.m. Who was printing it out then? My goodness. I just realized that. How do they explain that? Wow. Okay. Well, that's something big that we've just found just then. Goodness. Okay. Well, bear that in mind, guys. We'll do a bit more digging into that if there's any reasonable explanation for that, because that's 2.5 years earlier, 3 years earlier nearly, than when Kathy Shank brings this to light. So that's very hard to understand, isn't it? Okay, anyway, let's just go back to here where we've got the narrative. And one of the things that I'd like to do is to compare what is said here to what Rick actually says in the interrogation videos. And that will take probably a little bit more detailed time. So I might not do that right now that I've just come across that other key detail, bombshell, just as we're looking at this. But if you look at the narrative, it says Mr. Allen was on the trail between 1:30 to 3:30. I can see now where Brad and Andy was saying that this sounds like he was in there in that time frame, and that seems like that's how the questioning was. It was like, what time was Rick on on the trails that day? Was he, it sounds like someone said, were you on the trails between 1:30 and 3:30? And he said yes, because that's how this narrative sounds here. We know that in the initial sheet that I showed you a minute ago, it said 1 to 3, which is more in line with the timeline that I've mapped out. It says he parked at the old Farm Bureau building and walked to the new Freedom Bridge. So this is suggesting the CPS building. He's then walked to the new Freedom Bridge. And while he's at the Freedom Bridge, he sees 3 females. He noted one was taller and had brown or black long hair. He did not remember description, nor did he speak with them. He walked from the Freedom Bridge to the High Bridge. He did not see anybody, although stated he was watching a stock ticker on his phone as he walked. Really important fact there, because if he was walking with a stock ticker in his hands, this again explains why he didn't see everybody, and also why he would have possibly been less likely to have been seen as well by anyone, because he's focused on his phone. He's not going to be giving eye contact. There's not going to be anything super sort of salient about him, as I've mentioned before. He stated that there were vehicles parked at the High Bridge trailhead. However, he did not pay attention to them. He did not take any photos or videos. His cell phone did not list an IMEI, but did have the following, which is a MEAD and a MEAD hex number, potential follow-up information, who were the 3 girls walking in the area of Freedom Bridge. Now, I do believe that this tip here, this information here, was the information that Dulin collected on that day. I believe he's summarized it very, very briefly. He's really just taken very basic information here, and I believe that he may have misconstrued things that Rick has said, because this doesn't marry up with what Rick says in the 2022 interview. And I don't just mean in terms of time. I am not a big believer in the earlier timeline, because I don't feel that it's easy to explain all of the missed people seeing each other. I do believe he was on the bridge, or sorry, not on the bridge, but on the trails between 1 and 2. I believe he leaves around 2 and leaves before the crime occurs. But what I do see is different from this is, here it says he saw the 3 females around the Freedom Bridge, yet what he said in the interview with Mullen and Liggett is that he saw the girls, they were walking off the trail, headed back towards where the cars were parked. Now, the cars that he mentions the entire time in that interview, and again here, are parked at the bridge. Where does it say it actually? It says it here. The High Bridge trailhead. So the High Bridge trailhead is the Mears area. That's what he's referring to in the interview, and it also is what people refer to as the High Bridge trailhead. That is the area where there's the Abby and Libby Memorial, where there's the 505 trail and then the 501 trail. So in his interview, he talks about seeing them there, which lines up with the timeline that I have suggested. Because if this is indeed true, that he sees the girls at the Freedom Bridge, then this, of course, is more suspicious, because we know that the 4 girls said that they saw Bridge Guy around that area just prior to the Freedom Bridge as they were leaving, or as they were kind of walking from the bench back towards the Freedom Bridge. So that would be suspicious. And again, that would have alerted them, because they seem to not be sure which 3 girls he saw. And, they don't seem to have linked those details yet. And yet, obviously, by this stage, you would assume that they have spoken to Bree Wilbur and Rayleigh Voorhees. I actually have to double check. I mean, we don't know what time those interviews occurred. We don't know when Bree Wilbur's interview is, because we don't have a date for that for 2017, and I still believe that's one of the ones that was recorded over. But I do believe they would have been interviewed before the 18th of the 2nd. I believe Bree, being friends with Kelsey, was interviewed much earlier, and I'll have to double check with Riley when her interview date is on the Discovery map. We can have a look at that a little bit later. Actually, I'm going to pause. Let me go and have a look. So yes, Rayleigh Voorhees and Anna Spath were interviewed, I believe, on the 15th of February. So at this stage, we've already heard from them, or the police have already heard from them, and therefore were aware that they had seen Bridge Guy as they were heading back towards the Freedom Bridge and leaving the trails that day. So again, Dulin is not completely clueless. He's on the stage at the press conference a few days later. He's clearly part of this investigation in a way, in a significant enough way. And we also know that, remember, this previous page here says that it was received by Jerry Holman. Is it the previous page? Or is it this page? I'm just looking. Yes, it's the previous page. Right. So in this page, we see that Jerry Holman has received this. And even though it doesn't mention exactly where he says he saw the girls, is it? I'm going between these two again. He advised he saw 3 young females. The fact is, he said he saw young females. So that would have triggered anybody to look into this further. We've got 1 to 3, and we've got young females. There's going to be the assumption that those young females are either one of the 4 girls, 3 of the 4 girls, or Abby and Libby, and perhaps, Kelsey or someone else, or that he's got his time wrong, or there was someone else on there that, on the bridge or on the trails that they weren't aware of. That would trigger more analysis, hence why, find out more about the 3 girls. So straight away, we're dealing with a lot of absurdities here, because I just can never think of another word other than absurd for this, because it really is. I mean, this narrative matches up with potentially him being Bridge Guy. Now, obviously, I don't think he is Bridge Guy, but this would be enough to trigger my interest to look deeper. And yet all that we see in this case is this: lead cleared, and that's it. It's not looked to get at again after that day. That's really confusing. Now, the fact is, we've always known that they got the Mead hex data, which is the unique phone identifier. So this is a way that we can actually track the specific phone, not just the number. And they've had that. We've always seen that on the PCA. And I've always said to you guys, like, that there is indicative that they were doing tracings of phones. And we know that they did the phone dumps. We know that they contacted Cheyenne Mill's mum at one point because her phone was registered as one of the phones in the area. Of course, that was in Cheyenne's possession at the time. We know that they used tower dumps. We know that they used geofencing. And so this information here was taken, and it was for a reason. And then we see also here that the phone info was provided to ISP. So clearly that was provided on some sort of document too, because this reads as though it's not just this particular lead sheet or whatever they call this information here, but it suggests that the phone info specifically was provided to the ISP. Now, I'd be curious, is that phone info just the IME, not IME, Mead hex, Mead number, or by this stage on the 18th of the 2nd, which is the day after, have they, been able to access specifically the information related to that Mead hex? I don't know. I mean, that sounds like a very quick turnaround if they have been able to do that. But regardless, we know that phone info has been provided. That doesn't say lead sheet provided. It says phone info. How did they provide that? Was that in the form of another document? Was that entered into some other system? Was it compared against tower dumps? Did they get tower or cell data from those identifiers? But it suggests that something more was done there, right? So this is certainly something I can understand why it was suppressed for as long as it was, because it brings up a lot of issues, doesn't it? The statement is inconsistent with what Rick says. Rick provides a far more detailed account in 2022, and he is able to talk about where he walks, what he sees, what type of cars. I mean, he says it's a sedan and an SUV in 2022, and yet we don't have that written on this tiny short narrative of Dulin's. So it does make you wonder if it was recorded, if Dulin had more information that he hasn't actually put in this official system or hasn't provided, or that's been suppressed, I suppose, that went along with this, because it doesn't really make sense why the story in here is so brief. Or is it that law enforcement really just didn't care about some of these witnesses, because Shane Mill has a fairly similar experience with law enforcement, a very brief 10-minute interview in a car park, I believe. Is it that there wasn't any interest in these witnesses for some other reason? And by some other reason, I mean, did they already know who was responsible for this crime, and therefore these witness statements were irrelevant to them? They weren't necessary, and maybe were even problematic if we are to believe there is some cover up. Now, I know that always sounds like a conspiracy. I've said this before. I'm not somebody who jumps to the conclusion that things are always a conspiracy. But in this case, I just don't find any other explanation for all the oddities. So long story short, you've sat with me as we've looked through these and still ended up going for 20 minutes or so. But a few key points here. If we look at this sheet, something incredibly concerning that we've just found in the bottom corner is that this is printed in 2019. Why? That's confusing. And then if we look at the narrative, it doesn't match up with what Rick is saying in 2022. And I don't suggest that that's because Rick is being inaccurate. I suggest that that's because it just feels like this is a very shorthand summarized perspective of what Rick said. And I believe there is omission of detail here. And I believe that Rick is trying to be incredibly conscientious and helpful in his interview, so he provides a lot more detail, but it just seems like they just didn't take that much detail, or they certainly didn't document it back then. And the other key problem here is that this statement here, as it's written, suggests that Rick ran into 3 girls at Freedom Bridge. And at this stage, this is a few days after they've already interviewed some, at least, of the 4 girls who said they saw bridge guy or a person of interest at the Freedom Bridge. That marries up with the exact time frame here of Rick Allen saying potentially that he arrived on the trails. So why did nobody think that this was more relevant than it was? And then the final point I've made is that we have 5 potentially law enforcement officers or people within the police department who have had this information passed through them, and one of them being Jerry Holman. This is very confusing, because we can't say it's just one person that's forgotten, or even 2 people. We've got multiple people here, and we don't even know which one of those people is the person who wrote lead cleared. We don't know who did that, but we know that the lead was cleared and not followed up again after the 19th of February for some reason. So lots to think about. I'm so curious for your thoughts. Please comment below if you've got questions, thoughts, interpretations. Am I missing something? Certainly just looking at that just then, I've seen more things that concern me than I did before. It's just a few sheets of paper, and yet it's really relevant. It's got a lot of info on it. It's not good enough for them to say as well, just another point, a side point, that they had Rick Allen Whiteman, and that might have been what confused them. They had his phone number. We can see that clearly. They have a printout of his driver's license. I haven't shown that on the screen now, but that is part of the exhibits. So there is no excuse. There is no way that we could say that they didn't recognize or not recognize that they weren't privy to enough detail to follow this person up again. Okay, guys, that's enough for now. We'll talk more about this later. I'm going to actually do a video where I bring up the interview again and Rick's statements within the interview, and we'll compare them directly to the narrative here, the very short narrative written in Dulin's investigation lead sheet. Okay, guys, after doing a bit more digging, there are major red flags here on this document. So not only are we dealing with the fact that we have the printing date on the bottom corner that suggests that this was printed in October 2019, if you look up at the top, it says Kathy Shank, investigator. She was logged in here. So this is Kathy Shank logging in and printing this in 2019. On top of that, you'll see at the bottom of the page, it says 1 of 1 over in the left corner, which suggests this was just one page she printed. She made her way to this particular thread and printed it. It's not a bulk batch printing. You'll also see right up here, we've got return to browse threads. So she is individually searching threads. So in 2019, we've got Kathy Shank here looking this up and for whatever reason printing it. It may have been due to her clerical administrative duties, but nonetheless, she's looking specifically at this and she's putting it in a file or doing something with it. Now, does anyone remember her ever mentioning that in the testimony? I can tell you she does not mention that in the testimony because I've looked at the testimony. There is no mention of her accessing this in 2019. They make it sound like it was this massive fluke that happened in 2022. So there's something very off and odd about this. If she found this with the other sheet of paper, which is marked 2017, then how did they get next to each other in the first place? She's the one who printed this. This was printed in 2019 as well. So it suggests that law enforcement had access to this for a long time. Obviously, it was in that system. You can see here, return to browse threads, and it was printed in 2019. So I've tried to explore all possible angles of how this could work out, but I can't think of an innocent way that this has happened. What do you guys think?